Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Return to the Realm, a rereaders podcast for the Realm of the Elderlings series by Robin Hobb. I'm Kayiu, here with Alex and Leah, and today we're going to be doing chapters 10 through 14 of Royal Assassin. But again, as a reminder, this is a rereaders podcast, so we're going to be talking about any and all of the 16 books in the Realm of the Elderlings series. So if you stumbled on this video just because you've read Royal Assassin, cool, we love that for you, but keep reading the rest of the series and then come back and watch this. Yeah. And I don't think we have anything specific to announce or whatever, so we can just hop into the first chapter. Which is... Oh, I should actually pull up the document on our phone. Is Fool's Errand. Mm-hmm. She was like, man, that was a banger name. I gotta reuse that at some point. Mm-hmm. I almost wonder if she originally planned to name the last book in this trilogy Fool's Errand, because the errand that the chapter is referring to is going to find the Elderlings in the mountains. So it would make sense for the last book to be, because I guess Assassin's Quest is also referring to that, but that is like essentially the central event of the last book. So
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
I wonder if she did that and then the publishers were like, no, we want assassin in all of the names. Sorry.
You need a through line there. Even though, I think there's a line later where it's like Verity is like, the most remarkable thing about your fighting style is how you incredibly managed to stay alive while doing it, and that's the most Fitz thing ever. He's just he's not an assassin. He's just like, oh god, I'm here. I'm fighting. I'm fully here. I guess.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, one thing in the intro chapter, they're talking about how the skill faded. And it mentions in times of peace, the skill was kind of kept closer to the monarchy to prevent people from turning the use of the skill against them. But I'm like, why is that something you have to worry about in a time of peace? Isn't it in wartime where you'd have to worry about internal struggles and treachery when there's already chaos? I feel like every time I read more about the skill fading, I'm just like, King Bounty is a motherfucker. King Bounty did some paranoid stupid shit, and it hurt the Farseer line for forever. Yeah, because they make a point to Fitz just dismisses him, and it's just yeah, he's just there. And then when we later on have our first encounter with the Will later on, it's oh yeah, no, Fitz is once again an unreliable narrator, and Will is much more of a threat than his previous introductions would make you think.
Lead us to believe.
Start of the chapter, we have another moment of Fitz being I'm not bonding, with night eyes.
He's such a liar.
He's such a liar. I found there was a line here that I found interesting where he's it was as the wolf said, it was not a thing I did, but something I was. And I found that kind of interesting because I don't think this is a universal thing, but I think specifically in how the wit is discussed or treated by Burrich, and how it's framed there, it feels like you could read it as sort of a queer allegory in terms of the bigotry and or the prejudice that Burrich expresses. And so the way that this line struck me, because I was it feels kind of like an inversion of the hate the sin and not the sinner type lines, which was because I've always felt like that like you could read the wit as like a queer allegory in like some cases, and so like this line just like caught my eye because of that, and so I was like, huh, okay, interesting. And it could show like how Fitz has like internalized the prejudice against the wit, because like that's what Burge says. Like he's just like, yeah, I just like I don't like use it. It's just like a thing that happens sometimes. So
Yeah, Fitz is accepting that it's part of him and he can't change it about himself.
mhm. But he's like, I'm still not doing it. I'm not like actively using it. It's just me. But like,
He's still in denial.
and then next up, the next part of the chapter is Whistle, who I think this is the first introduction of this character, who was a former member of Verity's personal guard, ends up forming a Queen's Guard to protect and serve the Queen after the whole outing with the Forged Ones last time. And yeah, this section like beyond the obvious, like it's interesting and cool to see the people of the Six Duchies like take Ketrican as their own, even more so than their actual like born monarch. Um, is it feels like another example of like the Farseers doing jack shit, and so the people have to like take up their arms and like figure out a solution for themselves. And also, it's I think the first time like we've seen lots of people like kind of have a reaction to Fitz when he's like doing his chivalry bit. This is the first time that's actually coming up as like someone taking action and not just like acting or not just like appearing differently to Fitz or like not just perceiving Fitz differently. I think is interesting. I love like on a reread like the gradual buildup of like Fitz's chivalry 2.0 and how that has like political implications. Is like it's super cool how like there's that gradual buildup. Like because when I first read this, I was like just like yeah, yeah, weird. Like I guess this is just his new role now, and this is just like how it is with adulthood. But it's like it's this really like slow downward spiral, and Fitz is just like, oh no, that sucks. But he doesn't actually do like much to mitigate it, and that ends up being his downfall. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think later on in this chapter, Verity's like blood will tell, and it's like yeah, or like, and you could also connect it to the earlier line where it's like, yeah, it's just something he was, even if it's not something that he actively tries to do. He's he's a prince.
It's such a nature versus nurture thing, too, because he never knew chivalry. And yet, he's just naturally so much like him that, like, people in the keep respond to him almost as if he was chivalry.
And he wasn't even brought up to be a prince. Like, he doesn't have the formal training of how to be charismatic and how to talk and command respect like his father or his uncle was. So he kind of just, it comes so naturally to him, which it might not have to, well, it definitely didn't to Verity. And I'm sure that chivalry had a knack for it, and then it just got kind of honed with his like formal royal training.
Yeah, it's just like because once again, like living with the guardsmen and like the salt of the earth people and like growing up like, in Buckkeep Town like just gives him like such a cool perspective. He like and which is also what later on like when he says like these are my people, I think it like means a lot more than it does for like Verity or Shrewd to say that. Well, I guess they both have the skill and so they can like that's their form of empathy. But like I think that it's on a, like a different level for Fitz.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's more real for Fitz, because Fitz is in love with Molly, who was, like, at a raid, actively.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, his friend that was forged was killed. And he's, like, fighting forged ones out in the forest and stuff. So it's more tangible. It's not just him skill walking and seeing things happen. It's him knowing people that are in the midst of it or being in the midst of it himself.
Yeah, he's present for some of the scariest moments.
Right.
Yeah, and I always find it funny when like Fitz is like, oh, later on in the section, she's like, I have no one in the world. Ugh, I'm so lonely. And then meanwhile in the background, Sarah the cook or like whoever is just like, hey Fitz, how's it going? Would you like some pastries? And it's just like Fitz is like so alone. When
I
like
have no one who
if
loves
your parents
me.
He has a million
when like we see multiple
and like 3 dads and a wolf
Yeah.
and a girlfriend or a
Plenty
wife.
love.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like, okay, Fitz.
Crybaby.
Yeah, and it's just like the entire keep loves him and has a high opinion of him, other than Regal. So it's just like, But I guess speaking of people who love Fitz, the next section is kind of like the titular thing of this chapter, where the fool accosts Fitz and is like, "Hey, don't you think it's weird that there aren't that many skill users still around? Why is nobody looking for an elderling?" And like, in his usual way, Fitz is very dense, but I think we can excuse it in this case because this is such like a leap of logic. But yeah, the fool tries to like lay it out in several ways to Fitz, like, hey, you're gonna need to go find elderlings. You're gonna need to use your magics. I think you had a breakdown, right, Alex, of like the whole song that the fool sings to him. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there are like I think there are 3 main verses, and the first one is mostly about the skill and like the fool's trying to tell Fitz, why would you try and stop skilling and when you need to be getting stronger in it because your enemies are stronger in the skill and all that stuff. Then the second verse is kind of about being witted because the last line says something about being like chopped up and hung. And then the last verse is a merging of the 2 subjects that were in the first and second verse, which is kind of using both of the skills or all of the skills that he has, the skill and the wit, to help the 6 duchies and like the royal family survive this very tumultuous time.
It's funny because in hindsight, it's so obvious what it means and what like needs to get done. But I remember on my first read, I was like, what is he talking about? Why can't he just tell Fitz what to do?
I know I was.
Yeah, you can really empathize with this, where it's like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, just speak plainly.
It's like such a non sequitur where it's like Fitz has all this stuff on his mind, and then the fool is like, by the way, skill users, elderlings, and Fitz is like, how does this relate? How is this important? What are you talking about? And it's like, on one hand, like what the fool says about like, yo, I'm talking in riddles and stuff to like make you like think about this on your own and process it and actually remember it, makes sense. But also like Fitz is so stupid and you should know this. Just like tell it to him straight up.
Yeah.
Like do the thing you did with the poison, where it's like you're gonna get poisoned. Like you're gonna need to find the elderlings.
The only reason that the fool was even blunt with him to begin with was because he was mad. Like, yeah. I think he likes to be all secretive and aloof and make Fitz think about him more than he maybe needs to.
I think in Tawny Man, the fool mentions like, at that time I was basically a teenager, and so I was doing stupid teenager things. And like reading it through that lens, like definitely it makes a lot of sense, where it's just kind of like that capriciousness both of like the fool's own character, but also just like that age.
Definitely. So. One thing I loved about this section is the way the fool just like starts coming in and like walking next to Fitz and just starting in the middle of a conversation and just finishing. Like the conversation begins in the middle, but it is a connection to like whatever Fitz was thinking about. And like I just love that the fool can do that and just knows exactly what to say, even though he can't obviously read Fitz's mind. He just knows what's on his mind.
Like the place where it's like stuck out to me most was in the first book, where Fitz thinking like, "What should I name my dog?" And then the fool is just like, "Yeah, why don't you name him Smithy?" And it's just like, huh? I feel like even before like their skill touch link, I feel like there's something going on. Like there's some like it could also just be that the fool is hella perceptive and Fitz is very obvious. I could definitely believe that. But I also like feel like there's something. It could also be that like maybe Robin Hobb like didn't quite know what the role of the fool was going to be beyond this trilogy, and so it was just like, let's make them as mysterious as possible. And so this is a really mysterious thing to do, like finishing your sentence.
Well, I think also like there has to be some special connection between like the White Prophet and their catalyst that helps them become so in tune. Like I think even without, if they didn't have that skill bond, they would still be very in tune with each other, or at least the fool would be very in tune with Fitz, just because I think the fool needs to in order to help like exact the change that they need, that they see in the world, or that they see coming about from like using Fitz the way they need to.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a combination of the fool having like a general sense of what's going to happen or snippets of moments, and then also Fitz just being super obvious about everything. Because he thinks he's so sly, but Verity like insinuates in this section that he pretty much knows Fitz is witted, or he at least has like an inkling. And Fitz's mind is blown, and like everyone knows about Molly, even though he thinks he's been like so secretive about it. He's just. I get the sense that he's not a difficult person to read in any regard.
For sure.
It's so interesting because I say this every time, but like I think that like he's a character whose like entire like thing is like just rooted in candidness, and the whole world tries to like shape him away from that candidness into a very secretive person. And it's like this really like sad like kind of like shaping of someone who in a way that is like so antithetical to who they are.
Mm-hmm.
What are they gonna say? Yeah, and it's like compared to chivalry, it feels like that like candidness comes from chivalry. Except I suspect like chivalry is probably a little bit more aware / smarter about like what's going on.
I think he knew when to hold his tongue. Like maybe he didn't outright lie about things, but he definitely knew when to not just blurt out everything that was on his mind, unlike Fitz.
Yeah, he like probably knew about Fitz and kept it a secret for 6 years. And Fitz knows about Nettle for all of 2 seconds before he's blurting it out to Starling. So, like.
Oh yeah, getting back to the Fool's song, just real quick. A line that I never noticed before, but I picked out here is, "There's a future not yet fashioned, founded by your fiery passions." Which, like, I think even on previous rereads, I just thought that this was kind of just like, yeah, you go be the hero, change the future. Then I realized that like fiery passions could like be referring to like essentially like having a child, and in which case this could refer to both Nettle as like the next Farseer heir, I don't know how to pronounce it, and or dutiful. So just like the idea that like because the fool like really hammers in that as long as there's a Farseer heir to the throne, the future is bright. And so the thing is like, yeah, it feels like that's what's being referred to here. That like the by creating a Farseer heir, Fitz like opens up new possibilities as well.
Well, I think it could refer to both Dutiful and Nettle because they both play such a huge role in like shaping the world. Like Nettle becomes a skill master and she kind of revives the skill and follows in like Fitz's footsteps with like being super strong, but then she goes above and beyond and is like, I'm gonna train all of these people, I'm gonna like do all this research and bring it back to so that we never get it lost again.
Mm-hmm.
She is also like a pivotal part of their ability to free Icefire and survive like the battle with the Pale Woman, because if it weren't for her like giving the message to Burrich and Burrich like running off, then that dragon that the Pale Woman created might have killed them all. Like Burrich pretty much takes it down and Swift with that arrow. So it's like without Nettle's ability to communicate with Tintaglia and kind of creating this chain of events, they might have just all died and failed.
So even when Fitz isn't acting as a catalyst himself, the heirs that he created do.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it's kind of like an extension of him because they're his, like they wouldn't exist without him.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we could also extend that to B, but yeah, that's a whole different level.
It's a whole nother can of worms.
Oh yeah, the fool when like he's giving his riddle about the Elderlings, where he's like, well, what is it that has scales and verities, blah 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 blah. He mentions like Reltown, like Reltown vellums. Does anyone like? Do they mention Reltown elsewhere, or is it just kind of like a one-off? Like, hey, Reltown is a place.
I don't remember it anywhere, but I also could have just skimmed past it, not thinking that it was important if it's mentioned in passing in like further books.
I feel like there was another location that we had like a similar thing about last book, but I don't remember if it was the same one or a different random place.
I think it was a different one, but I can't remember what it was.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I think the last section of this chapter is Fitz goes to see Ketrican, who previously has been said to be distraught over after her return from the whole hunt, and has kind of just been in her rooms. But surprisingly, when Fitz goes to see her, she's very centered and like meditative, and she says that she has come back to herself. She's like, in the sense of like she's stopped trying to very hard to like be someone she isn't, and is like refocused on her values. Which I love this whole like section, and also like the description that Fitz gives of her centeredness, even before the wit comes in. It's just like that. It's very, very, very relatable to have that kind of thing where it's like a person who is like so sure of themselves that like it seems like they can, the whole like environment around them, or just like the way that they're like they move in their environment seems to like change it around them.
I think this also, the way that Ketrican kind of just opens herself up to the world reminds me of Verity saying, like, being open to skilling is just like not being closed off. And that's kind of how Ketrican is with the world. She's just not closing herself off. She's just allowing everything to come in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't remember who says it. Like, I think one of you like noted later that like Fitz like is super bad at like, yeah, or like he's super good at just like being open to the skill and the wit, but like he ends up putting up so many walls that make it hard for him to engage in that way.
Mm-hmm.
There's a quote here that I really loved, like, our ambitions and tasks that we set for ourselves, the framework we attempt to impose upon the world, is no more than a shadow of a tree cast across the snow. It will change as the sun moves, be swallowed in the night, sway with the wind, and when the smooth snow vanishes, it will lie distorted upon the uneven earth. But the tree continues to be. Do you understand that? You would if you stopped trying to understand it, if you gave up worrying about why this is important to me, and simply tried to see it as an idea that has worth in your own life. And I feel like the first part is Ketrican at her most like fool-like, talking about like thinking about stuff on like the macro level time-wise. And this whole section is like Ketrican at like her wolfiest, where she's like, yeah, you know, we live in the moment and we are what we are. Which again, no surprise that she ends up being like so open to the wit as a result.
I just wish that Fitz could have like somehow sneakily told her that she's witted, because it would have been so nice to see her like bond with an animal and have that kind of companionship. But I mean, like, we all understand why he didn't do it, but still, it would have been nice if he did. Or if like later on when the wit is a little bit more accepted, if he told her and then she could find somebody.
Mm-hmm.
I'm surprised she never does that, because she kind of figures it out herself. And she can, like, communicate with Night Eyes, and then, like, she thinks that Dutiful gets it from her. So she knows, but she, like, chooses never to bond. I wonder if she thinks that she shouldn't or can't until there's, like, no more wit persecution. Because she's sacrifice.
Probably.
Mm-hmm.
There was a part...
Yeah, I'm
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was just gonna say that like I almost feel like Ketrigan is not someone who would like feel the need to seek out a wit bond. She's just kind of like she's just like has like a good connection, such understanding of all of the people already in her life. I feel like instead of like going out and seeking a wit bond, she would just like there'd probably be like some random animal that like is like, you seem like a cool centered person, and she'd be like, yeah, cool, I am. Let's bond.
Yeah.
It would be like that. Like she would have to be approached about it.
She does get mad at Fitz, though, later on. I think in the next trilogy, or maybe even the last one, where she's like, why didn't you tell me that I was witted? Like, I wasted so much time. I could have had a little wit bond partner now, but I can't because I'm too old or something.
Oh, I don't remember that, which makes me think it's last trilogy stuff.
It might be, but she does get upset with him that he didn't tell her. So I wonder if she would have gone out. I don't think she would have gone and like in search of it just to find like someone to be bonded to, but I think that she would be more open and kind of aware of her connections to animals to see if one of them could have been her like wit partner.
There was a part in here that I noted because, Alex, I know you've mentioned a couple times, or we've talked a couple times about Molly being witted, possibly. And there was like another little clue in this part that made me think she probably is, because when Fitz tries to like open himself up to the world like Ketrigan is, there's a couple lines where like people around him are reacting to it, like people that we know are witted, like Burrich and then Ketrigan and even Sooty, and it mentions that Molly shrugged away and shook out her hair.
Yeah, she's definitely aware of something happening around her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels like she has like the same levels of wit awareness as like Ketrigan.
Right.
Whereas
it's not strong enough to be like overt and obvious like Burrich or Fitz, but it's enough that they could probably tap into it.
Yeah, just like being more in tune with the web of the world, I guess.
Well, we also kind of see what Ketrigan could have had through Molly and her bees, because Molly does have that kind of connection with her bees. So I'm sure that Ketrigan could have had some sort of relationship with an animal like that. It
would have been so cool if she got like a white fox.
I know, that's
just
what
like,
I was thinking.
I keep it around because
I could picture that, and then
it's just it's just my emblem.
I could
secretly it's just like wit bond partner.
I could see everyone just writing it off as like kind of the Queen's mascot, and it being fine because it's just like the Queen's mascot. It's her pet. It's fine, but like actually they're connected.
Okay. Do we have anything else for this chapter?
I don't
think so.
Okay, so let's move on to chapter 11, Lone Wolves.
This one,
which yeah, so it's a bunch of lonely people doing stupid lonely things. and being like, no, I'm better off lonely instead of actually reaching out to people. That's the entire chapter.
Yeah, basically.
Mhm. So it starts off with Fitz once again being like, you know, we're not supposed to be bonded, Night Eyes. Here, I'm taking you to the mice barn.
Yeah, he's like, I'm just gonna drop you off here. Goodbye.
Yeah. Yes, there are many mice. You will not starve.
Why?
At least you will not starve of hunger.
Yeah, why did he think that was gonna be fine? Like, I'm sure mice are not the most appetizing thing for Night Eyes to eat. So he's just like, yeah, you can just eat. It'd be like eating bread all day, but like only bread, no like yummy butter or anything, like just something plain to sustain you. That doesn't sound delicious.
Night Eyes does seem pretty excited, and like he was like, wow, these are some fat rats or whatever. And so I think that like when Night Eyes was thinking it was like a one-off thing was pretty into it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But I think
When
long
Night Eyes
maybe pissed.
Yeah, when Night Eyes all of a sudden turns around and realizes it's like, you're abandoning me. I like cringed when I was reading it because it was like, ouch,
Yeah.
poor puppy.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's kind of wild that like Night Eyes knows more about consent, it seems, than Fitz does, because Night Eyes is like, you can't force this on me. Like, I get a choice in this matter. You can't force yourself to like unbond from me because that's not giving me any like say in the matter. And we're two people in this relationship.
Mhm. Though, well, I mean, I feel like it's one of those things where like it's weird because I feel like if this was just like a normal relationship, I feel like there's definitely like the thing of like one person can totally like break it off and be like, no, I don't want this. But like with the wit, there's just like that deeper thing of like once you're bonded, you can't like unbond.
Yeah.
It's just like not really a thing that's possible. And like more so than that, it's just like even without the wit, like it's just a dick move on Fitz's part because like Fitz knows that like Night Eyes does not have a prospect at like a normal life anymore.
Yeah, there's no way a
And
well-established pack of wolves is going to accept him in as a stranger. They would kill his ass the second he got close.
He also Fitz tells him there are no wolves nearby.
Yeah, so he's leaving him to his, just completely to himself.
oh,
Mm-hmm.
and like it's probably so frustrating for Night Eyes because Night Eyes is like, I see you like our bond, like I can feel it. There's just some like stupid human shit that is preventing you from bonding with me. Can you get over your fucking humanness for once? Yeah, there's a line here that I love. My heart is my own. I give it where I will. And I feel like the Fool also says something like this in Golden Fool. I can't remember if it's like during the whole argument or whatever, but like this line like really reminded me of something the Fool said at some point.
Move, man. You gotta move.
Because I think that like the Fool says something similar to Fitz. Yeah, which is also like the funniest thing where like Fitz is like, I'm so alone, and someone's like, I love you and I care about you, and he's like, not like that, not right now. Just like, anyways, back to being alone. Mm-hmm.
One thing I hate about this scene is Fitz like repelling Night Eyes. I hate it so much because Night Eyes already feels alone and like Fitz is abandoning him, and then he's being pushed away and like scared of like the one person who he thought was gonna have his back for a while. And Fitz just like sucks. I hate him in this moment.
I forgot that.
And like the repelling is probably something that like Night Eyes has never felt. It's like such a like weirdly unique thing to the wit.
Yeah.
So it's the shock of like, what the fuck?
Yeah,
And it's like I don't think that animals can repel, right? It's like a uniquely humans with the wit thing.
Yeah, I don't know. It probably is just for humans because they don't have like sharp teeth and claws to protect themselves.
Mm-hmm. You can have a little repel as a treat.
What were you gonna say, Leah?
Oh, I was just gonna say that I totally forgot that even happened, and it was another like cringe moment because their bond becomes such an integral part of this series as a whole. Like, for how few books Night Eyes is really in, like their relationship is what I think of first when I think of this series, and like the fact that it's actually repels him in this part is like painful.
Yeah, it's definitely hard. It's hard to read back knowing how they are later on. And you're just like, you're such a freaking stupid head. You saw.
I know, I was shocked when I forgot it. I was like, oh my god, I can't believe Fitz just repelled Night Eyes. What the heck?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not a fun time.
I know what you mean when you said cringe, but also like just like the way you said it was like the funniest thing to me. I'm just imagining like on YouTube like Realm of the Elderlings cringe compilation, and it's just like it's just like someone like stitches all 16 audiobooks together, and that's it.
Oh my god.
Just yeah, it's you made like a note here about like Fitz saying like how he feels like just like emotional pain after like cutting himself off from Night Eyes, and that really hit me. Just like the description of like, yeah, like this is still actually painful though. And the note that like it was worse than when Burge had taken Nosy for I'd done this to myself. Which, yeah, Fitz, you do keep cutting yourself off from other people. You gotta stop ghosting them. Come on now.
Well, I think it was only partly like I think the reason that he felt so bad was only part because he had done it to himself, and part I think more because his bond was stronger with Night Eyes than it like even before he had accepted it, his bond was stronger with Night Eyes than any of his other previous wit bonds. So like that must have been a really big deal to kind of do that and then have it be such a huge part of yourself without kind of acknowledging it, and then just it being gone because of you.
Yeah, and like right after Fitz runs off, a group of Forged Ones attacks, and Fitz is kind of struggling until Night Eyes comes to save his stupid cow teeth using like as.
Yeah.
I love like how the series makes combat not just feel like a thing that happens and like okay we're moving on, because like specifically like Fitz getting bitten here, like he holds that scar for years all the way to like the end of Golden Fool, and even then he like it's just
It's really gross.
there's a real sense of but like also like there's this real sense of like there's consequences to any sort of combat, and like you accumulate scars over time,
and the things we go through
And so-
stick with us.
Mm-hmm.
That scar in particular, I believe in the next book is how the guards identify him. Like a group of guards when they catch him and then he poisons all of them. I think it's because they see the bite mark scar. And they're like, oh, you definitely are the bastard because you have a actual chunk missing out of your body because someone tried to eat you.
Can you imagine how traumatizing and scary that must be? Like knowing that a human being is so hungry that they would be willing to eat you while you're still alive and your body raw. Like just take a little chunk and just swallow it down. Like I can't imagine the terror that Fitz was feeling when that happened.
No, me neither.
One thing about that scene that I actually like is the fact that like Night Eyes comes back and the first thing he says to Fitz is brother. Like he just kind of forgives and forgets immediately. He's like, my brother's in need, I need to go help him. After Fitz terrified the fuck out of him by repelling him. Like, even though Fitz did everything that he could to drive Night Eyes away, including like physically scaring him, Night Eyes like knew that their relationship and bond was stronger than even that. Like, he would overcome all of that to protect Fitz.
Yeah, it's the very wolfish thing, right? Like, what matters is the now when Fitz is being attacked, and not the 5 minutes ago
Yeah, he
when Fitz was being a
hold a
dick.
grudge.
Mm-hmm. Also, I totally forgot that we didn't actually know Night Eyes' name yet, because we've been just like bandying the name around. But then like I was like, oh my god, it takes this long for Night Eyes to give Fitz his name. Like, it's such like their bonding is definitely not like cheap. Like, it's built up like so slowly and like so like meticulously.
Yeah.
Which again, like, there was like a very easy justification for them to like have bonded earlier because of like the intensity of like that initial like emotional sync.
Yeah.
But yeah, I taking it slow made it like so much more compelling to read. And makes it feel a lot more meaningful than the other previous bonds.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't know about you, but the first time I read this, I was like, "Oh, cool, another animal to die." Like, after I was so traumatized after Smithy and Nosy, I was
You
like
weren't
so
gonna
jaded.
get
I was like,
attached.
"Cool, how are they gonna keep?" Yeah, I was like, "No, not again." I was Fitz, like trying not to bond.
I can't afford this pain.
Mm-hmm. And then right as I like got over and I was like, okay, cool, Night Eyes is here to stay. Phew. They fucking kill him off in Fool's Errand.
But I think it's equally as heartbreaking, but it's less, I think, like traumatizing and bad because Night Eyes dies of old age.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like he just gets taken away and we think he's dead, or he like sacrifices himself to save Fitz. It's just like he lived as long as he could and then it was just his time to go. It wasn't a horrible, scary, sad death. Even though
It's
it was
also foreshadowed that whole book. Like, the whole book is Robin Hobb setting us up.
She's
to
like,
lose.
get ready, it's coming. At least it's not all of a sudden, like with Smithy
He's
and
warning
Toby.
us.
Yeah. We get
Right,
some we get like our toes dipped into it before we get plunged in.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I noticed in this section while I was reading later on is the way that Fitz kind of has that double vision a little bit, because he says when he fully accepts his bond with Night Eyes, he has double vision for a second and then it clears and he can like he just has double senses now. And then he kind of has that same experience or reaction when he first kind of skill links with Verity later on, where he's like, oh, I had double vision. I was like seeing myself, but also seeing Verity at the same time. And that only goes away, I think, when like Verity turns his head. But it was kind of weird that he can have such similar experiences with the two very different magics.
Which again makes me think that like they probably aren't so different in like mechanically.
Yeah.
At least in the way Fitz uses them. Because he's like not good at distinguishing between them, and he kind of just goes about everything the same way, so he doesn't like approach them differently at all.
Yeah.
Going back to this fight that he has, it's the first time of like an infinite amount of times that Night Eyes saves Fitz's life. But it's also just like particularly disgusting that after the fact, Fitz kind of like blacks out or whatever, and then when he comes to, he's spitting out blood and beard hair.
Yeah.
Like,
that's so
I can't think.
I think I just glossed over that.
I didn't want to think about it, so I'm like, let me just pretend like I didn't see this. But then it happens again later on when he's fighting the forged ones after the little girl. Like, he needs to stop becoming a wolf because he's not. He's got people.
It's so gross. Like, I can't think of much more that is, like, more gross.
Yeah, me neither.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and after the fight, Fitz returns to Buckkeep Castle and meets with Verity, where they have like a longer conversation. I very much empathize with Fitz here when he was like, "How could it be that I knew more of his wife than he did?" And it's like, yeah, come on, like Verity, you are so bad at this. Like, I know that you have like a lot going on, but you're like, instead of juggling everything, you're just dropping every single ball. Like, come on now.
Verity's not doing so hot in the relationship aspect of his life, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also he was kind of a dick to Fitz because Fitz is like, yeah, I've been lonely, and then Verity's like, no, you don't get it. I'm so lonely for chivalry. It's like being the only one of something in the world, like the very last wolf hunting alone. And then Fitz is like, yeah, no, I totally don't get that. Would never understand that feeling. And this is how I know that Verity is not using the skill like proper because we come up and like Fitz is like worried like, oh, Verity's skilling out of the tower, and he's like, nah, he shouldn't be doing that. And this is how I know that like Verity's like not turning his skill properly, because like if he was skilling at Fitz, he would know that Fitz feels that loneliness too. But he's like directing his skill like outwards towards the coast or whatever. And yeah, another thing that like I picked up from the section was Verity's talking about how like chivalry could make like leaps of intuition, but Verity like wants or needs to like lay out all the facts and like find patterns in them, which I thought was super interesting because I feel like this is one moment where we see Fitz, or one trait that like is distinctly more Verity than chivalry for Fitz, because I feel like Fitz is not nowhere near the type to like make leaps of intuition or like have that type of insight, but he is very much like, okay, here's what I know, let's lay it out. He's very like practical and less like intuitive in that sense. Like, yeah, I thought that was like a super cool like almost like the first time we've seen him like be different from his father in that respect.
And I think this is something that kind of Shade helps foster within Fitz, of like looking at everything and not jumping to conclusions and making sure that you have all of the information before you make any decisions.
For sure. Oh yeah, also hashtag full watch. Verity is like, Fitz is like, to understand them you must become them, and then Verity's like, now who sounds like the fool? And I'm like, aha, okay.
I think we need to have the Fool Watch, which we already have, and then we also need to have a Wolf Watch, where anything gets referred to as a wolf that isn't directly talking about like Night Eyes, because it happens so much. And it happened so much in the first book too, before we even had Night Eyes.
Yeah, like right here, like, oh, I'm the very last wolf hunting alone. It's like, oh, you are? Like, yeah. Like, Verity just uses a lot of wolf metaphors, and it's just like, huh?
Yeah.
Verity and Burrich, they're like the main wolf metaphor culprits.
Fair. I feel like Burrich just uses animal metaphors in general, though, because he's just like animal brained.
Yeah. Especially the fact like calling Molly, what is it, her pelt or something?
He says she has a red glint to her coat.
Yes.
Yeah, red glint to her coat. Yeah,
her hair.
Burrich.
Like, no lie, when he first said that, I thought he was talking about like the skirts, and I'm like, okay, yeah, weird thing to say, red glint. And then I realized he was talking about her hair. I'm like, that's the stupidest shit I've ever heard. Burrich.
Like, Burrich, this is why you're single.
He also needs to have more human interaction. I think that's like a sign that he needs to be talking to people more, because what?
I love how, like, apparently Burrich is hot. Burrich and Fitz are both hot, but head empty. They're actually just both himbos.
Yes.
They're hot and socially inept and like super weird.
Yeah.
Okay, do we have anything else in this chapter?
Nope.
Not me.
Okay, so we're moving on to chapter 12, Task. Very much feels like a continuation of last chapter, but also Fitz ends up in a random depressive loneliness spiral. And essentially, yeah, like I like the way you phrased Alex. Teenage dramatics happens,
Oh my
basically.
God, it's ridiculous. But it's
so
so
over the
it's so funny how like realistic it is though. Because I was talking with some friends last night and like one of them works with a teenager and she was talking about like how much relationship drama she has and how she like is never going to have the connection that she had with her ex ever again with any other guy because they were like meant to be, but like he cheated on her and all of this stuff. Like it was so dramatic. And I had just read this chapter and I'm like, oh my God, like Hobb really nailed the teenage drama. Like she did a great job.
Yeah, I have 4 teenage siblings, and I can definitely attest, like, everything is the end of the world. Everything is like, this relationship is the one that I'm gonna be with forever, and they're like the right person for whatever. It's just like it's very accurate. Like she had to have written this when her kids were teenagers or something.
Yeah.
Because it's so
It's perfect.
like right.
God,
It's
can you imagine being the child of a writer? They put you on blast to the entire world.
yeah.
Damn. So, but before we get to all of that, the chapter starts off with like Fitz accompanying Ketrican to repair the Queen's Garden in the tower. And okay, one thing I've been noting is that like every time Fitz gives like way more description to Ketrican than any other character usually.
Mhm.
Like he always makes sure to like note the color of her eyes in the moment or like give a metaphor for that, like the color of her hair or whatever. And like knowing what we know about like Fitz like and Ketrican maybe like having a mutual attraction, like I was like this probably means something. So I've been like noting it. And here like Fitz is like, wow, Verity should come here, and if he saw Ketrican like this, then he could not help but love her. And like with zero self-reflection, is like doesn't think about like, well, okay, wait, why, what does that say about me looking at her now? And it's just like, oh my god, like,
Yeah, it's
I think like,
like I can
yeah, Fitz just doesn't understand his own feelings. He needs someone else to spell out for him. Like Fitz, you may have like literally
You
like
have a crush on the queen.
I don't yeah, and I it's the same thing where like if Patience straight up had not told Fitz that like, hey, Molly likes you, I don't think Fitz would have processed his own feelings like at all.
Yeah.
Like, and in the same way here, like no one tells Fitz that like, do you have a crush on the queen? Because obviously no one's going to say that, but that also leads to him like never actually dealing with any of these emotions.
And writing off Ketrican's kind of advances as like she's just trying to comfort me later on in the books, but it's like she wants you, bro. Like she just got with the queen.
Uh-huh.
Night Eye.
And Fitz is like, I'm so lonely and no one will ever love me, and also I'm ugly.
Yes.
Like, god damn it, Fitz.
At least he's not crying about being a cripple anymore, though. Got over that quite quickly.
Yeah, I love like later in the section where like Birch is like, so you don't have any seizures, you're totally cool. Cool. It looks like the solution is to beat it out of you. And then like I love the line after that where like Fitz is like, in the next hour, Birch practiced his new like theory of medicine quite thoroughly.
Yeah.
It's just like, but yeah. So after going to see Ketrican, Fitz moves on and goes and sees Night Eyes again, and they have like, now that they've finally Fitz has like worked out his issues, they have a much more like amicable relationship. But one thing that I really liked here is Night Eyes like making sure to let Fitz know that Night Eyes like can't fulfill all of his emotional needs, which I think is really cool because it's so much more mature than Smithy. Because Smithy was just like, Fitz, you're my entire world.
Yeah.
Everything revolves around you. Love me. So Night Eye saying that is like such a gradual, it shows such a progression in like the maturity of Fitz and those he's bonding with. Though, of course, later on in this chapter, Fitz is like, actually, Molly, I'm going to stake all of my emotional needs and well-being on you. Love me. And it's like, did you listen to your wolf, dude?
Night Eyes is definitely becoming more mature than Fitz. And it just continues that way.
Yeah, he's definitely like more mature and smarter and also better at fighting and better in almost every way.
And he might be better looking. He's probably the most handsome wolf ever. Just like the best.
I mean, we don't know what happens when like we don't know all the details of what happens when Night Eyes leaves in book 3.
I wonder if there are baby Night Eyes running around. That'd be so freaking cute.
That would be great. Mm-hmm.
I love that they kind of like Fitz finally accepts the bond fully and how quickly he kind of goes from thinking of them as separate to thinking of them as like one being. Because he says as he's like walking away, he's like, I nodded to ourselves in the dark. Like, whoa, Fitz.
I also just really love that line from like a writing perspective because it seems so wrong, but it gets across exactly what is intended.
Yeah, that they're
like,
one.
Right.
It's like so intuitive, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And then later on when Fitz is having like his depressive spiral, he's like, what was I anymore to anyone except a tool? Was there anyone left who cared for me, myself? And I love like this like framing of it because it makes so much sense for him going to Patience, both because Patience loves him unconditionally, but also like last book when he was thinking like, oh, Patience like probably doesn't have like a very good opinion of me because she doesn't like see me. She like, who am I in her eyes without like all the assassinating stuff? So like every time Fitz is like feeling unsure about like who he is or what his role is in the world, he like comes back to Patience, and I love that for him. And I wish that he could have like explored that more. And I think things would have gone swimmingly if Molly hadn't been there. But unfortunately, Molly was there, and there's this
teenage drama.
Like it's just so overblown.
He's
yeah.
Like I would die if I was not with you.
And he's like grabbing onto her skirts like a lost child, and like he either has to let go or risk ripping her skirt when she's walking away. Like, Fitz, are you kidding me? Have some dignity and self-respect.
Yeah, I literally was thinking that exact thing. Oh my god.
Come on, Fitz. You're making a fool of yourself.
Making a fool of himself?
That was an accident.
I love Lacey, but I kind of wish she would have just like kept her nose out of things. Because she obviously ships them so hard. She's like constantly encouraging him to like be his dramatic little self.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know. She definitely.
It feels like Fitz is. It feels like Lacey is usually the most sensible of the bunch, and she sets Fitz on like the stupidest path possible. I was just like, I completely forgot that Lacey is the one who like convinces him to like go after Molly. It's like,
yeah.
I guess Lacey's just kind of like a romantic at heart, though. I could definitely see it. But also I'm like, no, Lacey, keep being sensible.
Well,
right.
Doesn't Shade warn Fitz about Lacey? And he's like, it's either him or like Burrich or someone. And he's like, you've got to be careful or else Lacey will like, you blink and Lacey's got your whole life planned out and she's like organizing everything for you. And that's what she's doing at times.
Yeah, I think like it was in reference to like, hey, you gotta like keep your chambers private and you gotta like do all of that. But it definitely makes sense where it's like I love how Fitz like, I'm a tool, and then like immediately he's like, oh, okay, I have the go ahead from Lacey. Okay, cool, gonna go do this thing, and it's
I have
like,
permission,
oh
let
my
me just
god,
go do it.
Oh yeah, and like near the end, there's a line where it's like, did I lie to myself then? Don't we all? Which was a throwback to the line in the previous section where it's like, an assassin cannot afford to lie to himself. And this is like Fitz explicitly being like, I'm lying to myself. I'm going to pretend that everything's going to work out, and it's totally not like going to come crashing down around me.
I kind of wonder what would have happened if Shade had been here this entire time. Like, I bet he would have put the nix on Fitz and Molly before it even started. Or before Fitz had, like, started kind of trying to make those connections. Like, Shade would have been on it, and he would have stopped it right away.
I love how, like, Fitz is like, oh man, I really hope Shade doesn't come back tonight, but can you imagine Shade is like, okay, time to meet with my boy, and just opens the door.
Molly would have been terrified.
I would simply perish on the spot. I would not leave the walls ever. Just like, you know what, this whole apprentice thing, not for me.
I don't need to train another assassin. I could just do it all on my own.
Me and my ferret against the world.
Yes.
I do like Shade, but I feel like I wouldn't put it past him to like make it seem as though Molly fell ill.
Yeah.
Or something.
And then she died.
Yeah.
Yeah. I could see that happening for sure. Because Shade...
Yeah, I don't think he would kill her, but like he would definitely be like, he would definitely like be like, whoa, your uncle Rufus died, and he left you a bunch of cash for a chandlery, but only if you go to like town 100 miles away.
She has to go to a different
It's a better go. Mm-hmm. Basically, like what Regal offers her, except like a lot more subtle,
and in a way that would convince her to actually go. That it would, he would make it seem like it was her
manipulation. Right. Yeah, he'd manipulate her into going, whereas Regal was basically just like, hey, ho, take money and stop sleeping with my nephew, even though you're not.
And stop loving him, too.
Right.
He's unlovable. How could you love him? He's such a rat.
Regal is just like, he's so like manipulative, but then he's just like, his hatred just like he can't stop it from like coming out. He's like, you know, it'd be best if you just left because Fitz is an unlovable bastard. Yeah. He just mentions Fitz and it's just like,
and he's so ugly. I don't even know what you see in him.
God. Yeah, and like anytime that like Fitz and Molly are together, all I can think of is like happens Fanja, and it's just like Fitz is like, man, I did this to myself. Like, oh my god, like this is just karma. This is retribution. I should have listened to Patience, and I didn't, and now it's coming back around to bite me in the ass.
Yeah,
because like all of the descriptions too are like so like I feel like Robin Hobb must have like gone back and referenced like these scenes to like try and like see how like Hap would frame his relationship with Svanja, because it's like spot on the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, at least Fitz is self-aware. Like he definitely knows and acknowledges that he was just as ridiculous as Hap is being.
Looking back, yeah. I don't think that like in the moment
back,
he's like, I'm being so dramatic.
Right.
I would die for Molly.
Hindsight. But the difference is Fitz was lucky enough to like love someone that loved him back, whereas Hap loves Svanja, who is obviously like just a like who's around right now type of person.
It's because like Fitz Svanja actually has a sailor who comes and takes her away. Like there's an actual Jade. Like
yeah,
it's
not just her cousin.
Mm-hmm.
Which I feel like that was kind of weird, making Jade her cousin, because it seemed like it was a little bit romantic. Like it didn't seem like it was cousinly love at first.
It could also be like Fitz is not a good judge of anything, but also I totally agree. It feels like it could have been written or set up in a way where it was more obviously Fitz misinterpreting something.
Yeah.
But wasn't it like Jade had like his arm around her shoulder or whatever, and it just like there's just like
I want to say she like kissed his cheek or something even.
Yeah. And I feel like he like acted weird towards Fitz the one time that they had like an interaction because it was like a little competition or something. But that also could just be Fitz being like,
Fitz is the forever unreliable narrator, so he might have interpreted it as like a competition, so that's how it's written.
It could also be like Jade being like seeing like the start of like romantic interest between Molly and like Fitz and like trying to evaluate like, yo, okay, who are you that you want to like?
Cousin.
Yeah.
I like though that as dramatic as Fitz is, Molly is just as dramatic, and she's a couple years older, so like you would think she would be mature and all that stuff, but she is like just as bad as Fitz. And at the end of this chapter, she's like, "Promise me, otherwise I shall not survive this day. Promise me you will return to me, for no matter what the king may say, know this, I am your wife, and I always will. Always." Like, you guys. This is your first real relationship. What?
Right.
Molly was so sensible to start. And it's just like, unfortunately, Fitz is just gets really stupidly persistent, and instead of that being like, fuck off, it's just like, oh, it's so romantic. He like broke into my room for me. I'm just like over here like, bro.
He climbs out his window and down a rope. He's what, at least 5 stories up. He could have died.
He's also like injured and hasn't slept.
Also, is that wrong? Like, I thought the servants' quarters were up a level. Oh, he goes up higher and then just climbs down. It's not his room, right?
I don't think he's coming from his room. Yeah, I think he like on purpose goes to the room above hers and rappels down.
Okay. Because when I read that, I just read it as like he's climbing down from his room. But thinking back, I'm like, that's not right. Because he lives below them, because he's like, I don't know, he's like status as like sort of nobleman. Better than a servant, but not quite royalty.
Yeah, he's kind of in between floors, because I remember when Molly's bringing him back to his room when she thinks he's drunk. He's like, just up a level, and she's like, that's where the royal family lives. And he's like, no, that other room. And she's like, that's where the bastard lives.
And she's like, are you sure you don't mean like up another floor? And he's like, no, I know where I live.
Like rereading this, it's like so like it's actually like Fitz's behavior is so fucking creepy. He tries her door to like open her door with a knife, and like she pointedly, like, he knocks, she like turns off the light, he like tries to open the door with a knife, and then like honestly, like, this guy's a goddamn stalker, and like the only reason this ends well is because like Molly ends up like doing a complete like 180, and it's like, actually, yeah, now I do like love you and want you now, but like in hindsight, it's just like so fucking ugh.
Yeah, could you imagine if she actually didn't like him and he was seen like breaking into her room? I think it's so funny though at this point.
Please, fantasy series, give us like healthy depictions of romance. We don't.
That's such a teenager thing to think is romantic, though, because if a guy did that, or if like a partner did that now, I would file a restraining order. But if someone did that when I was 16 or 17, I probably would have been like, oh my god, you love me so much.
But see, I think there's a difference between like, I feel like the romantic thing would be like throwing rocks at the window, or like just the rappelling down and
opening the window.
Yeah.
Yeah, and not after trying the door and like knocking and just like, I'm really not interested, and it's like,
well, and she's like, I'm gonna call the guards, and Fitz has the audacity to be like, well, put on some tea for them because like I'm not leaving. Like, he is ridiculous.
He really is.
I thought that was such a funny line though. I'm like, damn, Fitz, okay.
Fitz has some.
Like Fitz was really like he was on his bravado this chapter.
That would have got me. I think
After
telling the guards to like put some tea on for the guards, I would have been like, damn, okay, like I'll do it.
Right.
You got me, Fitz. Like, sorry.
And I love like how quickly he's like, no one loves me, and then like 3 seconds later, he's just like, actually, I'm the coolest and smartest person in the world, and
Yes.
look at me go.
I'm the most talented. I can get anybody I want.
Okay, so next up we have chapter 13, hunting. Basically, this chapter is, oh, you thought that fight earlier with the forged one was bad? You thought him getting a chunk bitten out of it was bad? Oh, hold on. Let's make it worse. So this is like
so much worse.
I would just like to point out that Fitz still has not slept. He's had like a full battle with forged ones. Went and talked to Verity. Had his whole tryst with Molly. And then went back to his room and basically like half-assedly cleaned his wounds. And then went out again to do more fighting. Like, what type of teenager shit? I wake up and 3 hours later I want a nap.
Yes.
And I love that like this is the book where Fitz started out being like, oh, I'm old, I'm incapable.
Right.
Going like
and now like
all-nighters and still being fine to like fight everybody.
Right. It's amazing that he can like move around and walk, and B survives another battle.
Which I have to assume is just because of Night Eyes.
Oh yeah,
like
definitely would have died without Night Eyes.
There's no doubt.
Case.
And this is the first time that Verity kind of goes with Fitz on like a little adventure through the skill.
Yeah, like it's another example of like Fitz, just don't think about it and you can actually use the skill pretty well.
Yeah,
whenever he focuses on it, Verity's like, nope, stop focusing on it. Like, I think Verity says at one point, it's hard to breathe if you think about trying to breathe.
Yeah, like, even breathing becomes like a chore when you think about it or something like that.
Yep. But then
like, there's a metaphor of like carrying a tray with like a wine glass filled to the brim. And it's like, if you just don't think about the fact that it's filled to the brim, you could carry it without spilling.
And if you don't,
but as soon as you have that awareness.
There are so many different things that get tied in with this. And one thing that I noticed was while Verity is asking Fitz to like figure out if he trusts Verity, and like Verity takes a step back, he like reaches out to Night Eyes and is like, I'm gonna have to do this on my own, like you can't come. And Night Eyes says, I should be there, but you may trust me to be unseen and unknowable. Like the fact that he's talking about trust as Fitz is like trying to decide, can I trust Verity with like all of my secrets? It was kind of fitting.
For sure. And then like when Fitz is like, yeah, you know, I have this friend who saw the place where the forged one were. And then like Verity goes on like this little thing about like, you know, the quiet folk often know much. Yeah. And like I thought that was an interesting little like aside, because in trilogy, obviously I think that like the closest parallel is like Rosemary, because like it's someone that like is kept by a member of the royal family solely as a spy because they're so inconspicuous.
Yeah.
But also the whole context around it also really reminds me of Tick later on.
That's what I thought of.
I thought of Thick right away as well. It's also like,
again,
interesting that
a whole trilogy away.
I think it's interesting that Verity doesn't like seem to know that Fitz is referring to an animal, considering in the last chapter when Fitz says, "How much do you know?" Verity says, "More than you, or less than you know, but more than you think I know," insinuating that he knows that like Fitz is witted and or has a bond. But then when this is brought up and Fitz just says like, "I know somebody," Verity assumes.
I think it's more just like Verity like accepting that Fitz doesn't want to talk about it, and like I almost feel like that's what the whole going on that whole story is. It's kind of like a bluster where it's like, yeah, you know, my like we had this like spy. So it's like, yeah, I totally get what you mean. Quiet folk always know stuff when like Verity like just is doing the talking for two because he knows that like Fitz is just trying to hide that Night Eyes is a wolf. I feel like
It could also be Verity's ignorance about the wit. Like, he might not know how it works, so he might not know that they can actually have conversations and that, like, Fitz's animal can tell him things and, like, communicate with him that way. Because, like, he might not know that that's something that's possible just yet.
fair, yeah. Because he definitely, at least by the end of this chapter, he is aware that like Fitz is witted.
Yeah.
Because he not so subtly references like, yeah, we need to use whatever tools we're given to fight this.
Which also kind of mirrors like the Fool's song of using all of the skills that you have. And then Verity goes on and confirms it. And that also kind of adds to the connection between Verity and the Fool. Even though like the Fool's kind of mad at Verity and doesn't want to have that connection.
And is it like next chapter where he's like I think it's next chapter where like there's a whole like drawing of the loyalty lines.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the next part of this chapter is the actual fight with the Forged Ones, and yeah, it's pretty brutal.
It's harder to read
kind of like
the last one.
Yeah, it's heavy.
We're just really saying something.
It's also I either glazed over it or intentionally forgot, but the fact that Night Eyes literally scalps one of them is really gross.
Yeah. I definitely forgot about that. And that's disgusting, but I mean, it was what he had to do.
See, I think with these fight scenes, I just like, as like a defense mechanism, I just like gloss over them. I'm like, blood, fighting. They're still fighting. Cool. Okay, they're done fighting. I can go back to close reading.
The battle scenes are few and far between, but man, they are visceral.
Yeah.
And yeah, they're visceral even with Hobb being like, Fitz flew into a battle rage and only remembers half of it. Yeah. And it's just like...
The half he remembers is very bad.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Also the fact that it's like this little girl and the descriptions of like her little hand and like her yellow dress and everything, it's just super
and Fitz like this, so this is what it feels like to hold a child, and he's like holding this poor dead baby, like, oh my god.
And he calls her his child, like at some point he says, I was still holding my child.
Oof.
Like,
so rough.
Yeah. And he's probably only what, 16? Like, it's very young to have to deal with something that traumatic.
Yeah.
And yeah, referring to it as my child also, like, it connects back to what Fitz says at the end of the chapter, where it's like, these are my people. After the fight, goes back and like confers with Verity and Burrich, and like it makes me sad because I thought that like Fitz had like gotten over this fear, but then like he thinks that Burrich is going to be like he's gonna like reprimand him about the wit. Instead he's like, Verity, why did you like send him out? He's just like trying to defend him to Verity, and I'm like, he's like, he cares about Fitz so much. I'm crying.
I know. But Fitz still doesn't see that. He doesn't see it like Burrich seeing Fitz as his kid. He just sees it as like, Burrich is doing his thing again. Making sure I don't
I think
see my
Fitz
dad.
is also. He's also like feeling a little jealous and excluded because of the like day-to-day work relationship that Hans and Burrich have.
Yeah, definitely. But I feel like he's making it worse for himself. Like, I think that he could have, like, if he visited the stables more and, like, took care of Sooty like he's supposed to, like, I think that he could still be in on it. Like, I think he's the one who's distancing himself, and he thinks that it's Hans and Burrich separating themselves from him. It's like, Fitz, you're so dumb.
And it's like, because he's like, yeah, they were talking about stuff I didn't understand, and it's just like, if you asked a question, I'm sure that like, and like I get it. Sometimes you can definitely just like feel excluded from a conversation, but it's also just like Fitz, whether it's like his own personality or sometimes just like he's a depressed little boy. He's really adept at taking like one situation and being like, this is my entire life.
Yeah.
And it's never gonna change. I'm always gonna be alone. And it's just like, oh my god.
You crybaby.
Mm-hmm. Which like I think that like there's definitely moments where I'm like sympathetic to Fitz, but other times I'm just like this like I think I'm sympathetic for how he feels about like being around Hans and Burge, especially like how he was with them in the mountains for so long and they were like his closest friends, and now he doesn't like get to see them that much. But then like whenever he's like, no one loves me, I'm just gonna conveniently forget about Patience. I'm like, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. Do you know how much Patience gave up for you?
Yeah,
how dare you?
That's your mom. But that's such a teenager
Mhm.
thing to do too, is like to just forget about your parents and like forget that they actually care about you and love you, and just think that you're so alone, and they're like, to you.
Mhm.
One thing that happened kind of right after the fight that I had completely forgot about is Fitz like shuts off his wit for a second. Like it must have just been such a traumatic thing that like Fitz can barely even process like being in his own body, let alone like having the wit. So it kind of just shuts off as like a survival mechanism maybe. And then Night Eyes is like
Because
trying
we
to
see him
talk
do
to
the same thing
him.
with the skill. Yeah, we see him do the same thing with the skill when later on like Antler Island, and like Verity isn't able to contact him as a result.
Mhm.
Which like, yeah, I didn't notice that the first time either. But like again, another parallel where like Fitz's walls for the wit and the skill like go up or go down in very similar or the same situations.
Yeah.
But yeah, it reminds me of like when Fitz like takes the skill cake in Fool's Fate and is just like completely cut off from everyone. Like,
I think it happened
yeah,
at some point in Assassin's Quest too, because that's why I believe that's why Night Eyes like ends up talking to Ketrigan, because he's like, I made her hear me.
oh yeah, because on the skill road,
Yeah, it was
like
something
he
about
stops being able to hear Night Eyes. Yeah,
something about the skill road made Fitz like unable to get through to Night Eyes, and then like that's also very weird when Night Eyes like starts acting more like a wolf. It'll be like he whined or something. It's like, what?
Yeah, instead of just talking.
Yep.
and it makes you realize like how the others see Night Eyes. Especially like there's a part where like the fool is like, this great warrior is Night Eyes, and then like Night is like, you thought I was like this drooling little puppy
I was
dog?
dumb.
Excuse me? Um, which again I think is also like a really good sign of like how in tune Ketrigan is, or like how much respect Ketrigan has for everything. Because even the fool, as like farsighted as he is, just like didn't realize it until he connected with Night Eyes. Well, like Ketrican never actually directly talks with Night Eyes, or like doesn't have like a conversation really. Like Night Eyes like conveys stuff to her, but she still has like from the get go so much respect for Night Eyes. She's like, oh yeah, the Fitz says that you are a cool, intelligent being, so I'm going to treat you with that kind of respect.
Yeah, I believe Fitz.
Okay. Do we have anything else for this chapter?
I don't think I do.
I don't think I do either.
Okay. So let's get into the last chapter for today's episode, chapter 14, Winterfest.
Also known as Beware of Winterfest.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, so in this chapter, the Fool comes in and there's like discussions basically of like where their loyalties lie, what they should be doing. And then Fitz finally decides to take the Fool's advice and go check up on Shrewd again and finds, oh man, he is really not being taken care of well. But kind of shows his hand a little bit too early by like aggressively locking out Wallace and trying to clean stuff up himself. And as a result, kind of tips off Regal's like, oh, okay, I know that you know what I'm doing now. And that's going to make Fitz's life harder going forward.
Yeah.
I thought it was funny that when Fitz kind of rushes in and like locks the door and starts opening all the windows and shit, Verity, who's still kind of skill riding him, says, Fitz, this is rash. Because I put in my notes, Verity, I hate to break it to you, but everything Fitz does in this book is rash.
Yes.
Royal Assassin, aka Fitz being rash.
Except
rash
for,
assassin.
Not bonding with Night Eyes soon enough. Like, he's rash about everything else that he shouldn't be rash about, and then he's like, well, I have to take it slow. Like, I can't bond with you. Like, I just have to set you free.
I mean, yeah, I can't use a skill. I have to put up my skill walls. And it's just like, no! Use the skill! Oh yeah, there's a note at the start of this has nothing to do with the plot, but there's a note at the start of the chapter where like Fitz is like, man, reading made me sleepy. And like me doing my reading at like midnight so I would be able to like have my notes in on time. I was like, mood.
Same Fitz.
Just like same Fitz. Yeah, at the very start, I love how Molly and Fitz are apparently like just the stinkiest little like motherfuckers on the planet. Where like Bert just like, what's going on? And then Fool is like, yeah, I'll have some of what you had, but not from you. Just like everyone's just clowning on him. It's another example of Fitz being like, wow, I'm so subtle and cool, and everyone's like, this is not. We like, yeah.
Everyone else is.
We've been here for 2 seconds and we know what's going on.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It is frustrating. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead first.
Oh, I was just going to say it's frustrating how many times we see the Fool like basically begging Fitz to go check in on Shrewd, and Fitz really doesn't do it until he has a reason that like he cares about to go see Shrewd, which is asking Molly to marry him. Like all of a sudden he's like, well, I need the king's permission, so I guess I'll finally go check on him.
I don't think that I noticed the Fool like asking Fitz to go see the king very often. Like I think it happened once, and when he did, like once the Fool asked him once, and then he went with the Fool and they like barged in. But then I don't remember the Fool like coming to him and being like, you need to see the king, you need to see the king. And it just keeps getting mentioned like, oh, the Fool kept saying this to me. But like as he's already barging in.
I think there are like a few times.
I think there was
There's
one
at least,
time
like,
where he went
3 or 4 times.
Yeah, where he went and like they wouldn't let him in, and he was basically just like, "Oh well, they didn't let me in."
So I kind of just must have glossed over it. I must have just pulled a Fitz.
And no, there's definitely like it's just kind of like in his daily tasks. Like cool.
Like lumped
Took a bath. Went to the stables. Tried to go see King Shrewd. Yeah, exactly.
One thing that's a little bit off track from this, but that this chapter made me think about for some reason, was how we discussed in like a previous episode about how like Fitz's skill is kind of just like naturally being open and like just pouring out, and B is like saying it's too loud. It seems like Fitz's natural state is to just kind of always be open, like with the skill and with the wit, and he has to just like he has to physically decide to set boundaries and confine himself within his own mind when that's not something that naturally comes to him.
Yeah, or trauma, or like or just trauma sets those boundaries for him, essentially.
Yep.
But yeah, like we see how receptive he is, like to the wit early on, and then also to the skill before Galen. Like again, if Galen and Burge had if Galen hadn't existed and if Burge had been more amicable to the wit, like Fitz, you mentioned this early in like one of the notes for the earlier chapter. Like Fitz would have just been like one of the strongest people in the kingdom for probably like hundreds of years, just because of like how not only having both magics but being like so proficient at both of them.
And them coming just so naturally to him.
Mm-hmm. But this is another chapter which makes me like want to know more about why the Fool is so fiercely loyal to Shrewd, because like the Fool like draws battle lines. He's like, Verity is your king, Shrewd is mine. Like I'm gonna do what's best for my king. You're gonna do what's best for yours. Now we both agree that Regal sucks, so we can agree on that.
Yeah,
but like other than that,
so let's not fight about who our king, where our loyalties lie.
Mm-hmm. And like I don't think I really noticed this on like the first reads of like how meaningful this change from Fitz being like Shrewd's man to being Verity's man is, and like how like explicit and distinctive a change it is. But yeah, I think I was just like, yeah, he loves Verity, but then like I didn't realize how much of it like it was like to turn away from Shrewd until these rereads.
Yeah, it's definitely something. Speaking of Shrewd and all of that, when did Wallace become a healer? Like he kept calling himself a healer and like announcing that he's a healer and being like, I'm the king's healer. But the last time we came in and checked, he was just the king's serving man. So like, when did he promote himself to healer?
Probably right around when Regal's assassins killed whoever the previous king's healer was.
I love the nickname Wallace. I think it's so funny.
I know, the Fool is amazing. I'll never not use that. Like, it's not Wallace. It's freaking Wallace.
Wallace. Yep.
And it leads to like one of my favorite like lines from the Fool, where it's like, it is not Wald's ass you should be worrying about, but Wald's ears. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, ooh, bars.
I wonder how long it took Robin Hobb to come up with that stuff, or was that just something she like wrote down on a napkin one day and was just waiting until she could figure out a book to use it in? It's like,
can you imagine if that was the origin story of the entire realm of Elderlings? Like, damn, Wallace, like this is kind of fire.
I feel like everything that comes out of the Fool's mouth is just like, I love all of it, but I know that I would never be able to come up with that on my own. So like, I don't know how she does it, but
no, me neither.
She and the Fool are amazing, and I love them both.
Golden.
Yeah, I envy how like writers who just like have characters in their head, and it's just like they're there. Because like, that's what Rob says. Like, yeah, there's like people in my head, and they just like I just think like, what would the Fool do?
Mm-hmm.
It's just like there.
Right.
They're fully
And it's
fleshed
like,
out.
but you also made him up or made them up. So.
And then they kind of like
Mhm.
take on lives of their own, because I think she said somewhere that she like creates an outline for the story and then she writes the book, and she's like, it would be nice if one day I could like actually write the book that I outlined, because so many things change because of the characters, so that it never ends up like how she planned it to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're like Sims with their free will set to high.
Yeah.
The way Hobb described it, it almost sounds like Hobb just like got transported to an alternate dimension as a kid, found like Fitz's notes, and was like, "Cool, I'll like this all happened. I can like make a book out of this."
Yeah.
Like it feels, it definitely feels like a history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even like I mentioned, or I noted it down in chapter 13, when Fitz is like trying so hard to not think about Night Eyes and not think about Molly and all of that stuff, thinking about it as he's going, and just the way that his thoughts flow one from the other, like it feels so natural, because like I feel like that's how I think, is like one thought just kind of flows into the next without realizing it, and that's exactly what he's doing. And that's like, how does she write that? Like, it's amazing.
Yeah, definitely. There are a lot of instances in her books where the thought processes or like the way a character connects things feels so real.
Mm-hmm.
It feels like so realistic that it's hard. I think that's why these books are so immersive for me and so like character driven for a lot of people, because it seems so natural that it's like you really feel like these are actual people that you know and care about and love, and then that's what makes it so heartbreaking when it ends too.
It feels like real life, and the things that happen to the characters and the way that like things end, it's like, this is how real life is. You don't get a happy ending all the time. Like, people are gonna get hurt and all of that, like, and like the thing, like the scars that follow them, like Fitz has that scar forever, because like that's how real life is. Like, you can't just wish away a scar.
Except when they accidentally skill it away and then they put it back.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I guess one last note before we wrap up is that I've officially started reading the Rain Wilds, and hopefully by the time we're done with Royal Assassin, I'll be done with the series. And that way, every time these guys talk about the Rain Wilds, I won't have to like take my headphones off, and I can actually. I feel like such a hypocrite everything, because I'm like, if you haven't read the full, at the start of every episode, I'm like, if you haven't read the full series, like read that and come back. Meanwhile, I'm over here, like pulling the team down by reading like.
Well, you also have to finish
by like
Fitz
reading
and Fool.
9 books or 11 books. Sorry.
Don't you have to finish?
Yeah, and see that's
because there's some things I want to talk about.
I mean, you can totally talk about Fitz and the Fool, because like I'm like cool with spoilers for that, because I read like 2/3 of it.
No, you have to experience the whole thing. It's so
okay.
You have to. It's bad, but it's something that you need to experience. It can't be spoiled.
Gotcha. I'm trying to speed it so that there's no like, we don't miss out on like stuff to talk about. So yeah, hopefully by the end of Farseer, I'll be done with both the Rain Wilds and that. But yeah, actually for realsies, thanks for watching. Next week we'll be covering chapters 15 through 19 of Royal Assassin. But until then, this is going to be Kayiu, Alex, and Leah signing off. Leah. Sorry, I don't know why I said Leah.
Princess Leia.
Oh my gosh, the number of times I got that in school. All right.
I think that this is like, I've been doing too well at pronouncing Realm of the Elderlings, and like my brain is like, okay, you got to mess up something. Yeah, today it's going to be Hair and Leah. Those are going to be like you're just going to mispronounce those horribly today.
I'll basically respond to anything that starts with an L. So. Oh.
Okay. Well, see y'all.
Yeah. Bye.